Hello, my name is Douglas Comer, and I'm president of the United States National Committee of the International Council on Monuments and Sites. We were, in fact, the first of 107 national committees for that international council, which often goes by the acronym ICOMOS. Here in the United States, we have adopted the name of World Heritage USA. As that name might imply, we are concerned with heritage all over the world, but especially what we in the United States can do to encourage the development of a new heritage. A heritage that explores and expands the links between heritage and the most pressing issues facing humanity today. At the top of that list are these issues: social justice, climate change, achieving the 2030 UN Development Goals, and learning from indigenous knowledge holders. In our webinar today, Heritage as a Driver of Climate Action, we will touch upon all of these. Over the next hour, we will hear from scientists, tribal leaders, and World Heritage Site managers who will describe how heritage practices are contributing to climate mitigation strategies. A good example of this is the development of the Flathead Reservation Climate Change Strategic Plan for the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes. This plan draws heavily from traditional knowledge and the wisdom of the elders from those tribes. As scientists from all fields now know, traditional knowledge and science-based action are complementary. If you look at the program for just about any scientific conference in 2023, you will see clear evidence of this. We have much to learn from the accumulated knowledge of people who have sought harmony with nature for thousands of years and see that all forms of life exist in a network. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Destry Jarvis, Vice President of World Heritage USA, who will moderate today's webinar. Now, thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to hear your thoughts and comments. With that, over to you, Destry.
Thank you very much, Doug. Welcome, everyone. I will introduce each of the three speakers and then reconvene everyone together at the end for Q&A. So put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I will field them as needed for the speakers at the end. So our first speaker today is Michael Durglo, who is the director or head of the Historic Preservation Program for the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes in northwestern Montana. They are on the east side, or excuse me, the west side of Glacier National Park, a World Heritage Site in the US. Michael led the effort to develop their reservation climate change strategic plan that Doug mentioned. And I think his work and his effectiveness, his expertise was recognized at the end of the Obama administration by his receiving the White House Champion of Change Award for his work up to that point. It has continued, and he is a staunch advocate for the application of traditional ecological knowledge that tribes have to managing these places, including the National Bison Range that is contiguous with and by historical times part of their tribe's ancestral landscape. So Michael, please join us.
Thanks, Destry, and thanks, Doug. Gesquex Pesia et the Suisum Het Louis Quex, Kiso Quictum Oxmoknik, Kotlix Kawaska Cloudla. Good morning, everybody. My name is Standing Grizzly Bear. My English name or my Suyapi name is Mike Durglo. And like Destry said, I'm the department head for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Tribal Historic Preservation Department. I know I don't look that old, but in August, I'll have 40 years in working for the tribe, and a lot of those years working with different agencies throughout mostly the Northwest, but basically throughout the entire United States and Canada. So I've been part of the tribal climate or tribal engagement working group for several years, and that's a national organization of tribal partnerships. One of the projects, and we talk about, we share and talk about all the different projects that are going on throughout the country. And a few years ago, they were talking about a project that they did over east on the coast, and I can't remember the name of the park, but they were looking at climate impacts to heritage and historic buildings and sites within that park area. And I raised my hand. I said, hey, why don't we do something up here in Glacier National Park? Because, you know, I have a real good, and the tribe has a real good working relationship with Glacier. And there are many, many cultural sites within the park boundaries that we still utilize, that we still visit, that are still significant and important to us. So a couple years later, sure enough, they said, Mike, do you want to do that project? And they said we have funding to do this. So I worked with Dr. Erin Seepkamp from North Carolina State University and a couple of her interns, and myself and some of our elders to put together this project. It's a pilot project. And, you know, at the time we were doing this project is when that memo came out from the Biden administration, basically instructing agencies to do a better job at consultation with tribes, associated tribes. And like a little light came on in my head, and I'm like, oh man, what an opportunity for us to work on some guidelines, because I know that there's agencies out there that are kind of scratching their head wondering how in the hell we're going to do this. And I know there's tribes too that are like saying, oh hell no, we've been trying to work with them for the last 100 years. We can't work with them. So ultimately, I've been invited to Washington, D.C., actually to Shepherdstown, West Virginia in June by the Department of Interior to work on some guidelines, departmental responsibilities for considering and inclusion of indigenous knowledge in departments, actions, and scientific research. So that's one of, I'm really excited about that, because it was kind of like, you know, when that light came on when we were doing this project, I thought, you know, it'd be awesome to have some kind of a guide, not just for the agencies, but for the tribes too, in protecting our traditional knowledge, our cultural sites, you know, over this time. So we started this project, I think it was, I want to say 2021, 22. So Erin Seepkamp is the professor at North Carolina State University. Sierra Mendelco works for the park. She's the cultural resource specialist up there. And I've known Sierra for several years, so it wasn't like we were building a new relationship. It was really more of strengthening something that we already had, building that relationship better, I think. So I don't know if you're familiar with PM 14.02. It's a memorandum that came down for the parks, and it directs managers to prioritize actions to cultural resources most at risk and significant. And that's basically where we saw the opportunity to develop this project. And the project purpose was to develop a guidance for national park managers during climate action planning of archaeological resources, including American Indian sites on park lands threatened by climate change. And I want to make sure that, you know, this is something that I've been had been really dear to me because of my upbringing with my elders in our cultural ways. And I know that you know, my dad and my grandparents, we used to go to Glacier Park and visit, and you know, basically he would tell me, "Oh, look over there, Mike. There's a he didn't call it a cultural modified tree at the time. He said there's a scarred tree over there. There's that's where, you know, our people used to camp over in that area." So it was really special to me, and I actually we interviewed several elders about this project. And so the goal of the project was to enhance stewardship of resources vulnerable to climate change impacts. For example, storm-related flooding and erosion. We don't see so much sea level rise, but we do see quite a lot of flooding and erosion and fire damage. So we selected 9 sites within the park, and just to give you some idea, we have we're made up of 3 different tribes: the Confederated Salish and Kootenai. So the Confederated Salish are the Pend Oreille, who are actually called Kalispet. That's what I am. I think Lewis and Clark were the Frenchmen were the ones that called us Pend Oreille, because we had earrings. The men wore earrings in our ears. So the Kalispet, the Bitterroot Salish, and the Kootenai. So there are 3 different distinct tribes that reside on the reservation here. And also we have the Blackfeet tribe, the Blood tribes in Canada. All of these tribes have common use areas within the park. We have identified that we want to, when I say that, it's like there's places that we don't want people to know. So we have documented over 300 sites within the park. And we looked at the different types of exposures, the sensitivity of those sites, and we came up with some strategies for responding to the climate impacts to those sites, or potential impacts. And then like I said, we did interview several elders about our relationship to the sites. So within the park boundaries, we looked at these sites, and there's really a multiple different sites. Some were historic campsites with lithic scatters. Some were culturally modified trees. There's one site that is called a buffalo kill site, where the buffalo historically crossed over the river at that site, and we had a camp there at that site. And what's happening there is there's the river keeps eroding into that site. So we talked to the elders about different alternatives. What do we want to do with that site to protect it? And they may say, nothing. We don't want you to do nothing. We want, you know, nature to take its course. So just leave it alone. So, you know, we did identify some different treatments, like, for instance, like placing riprap or something like that to slow the erosion. So the National Park Service did not fund this project. It was, I think it was, now I can't remember exactly where the funds came from. I'm not sure. So we grouped some of the sites in similar geographic areas. So there were some sites that were high in elevation. We used to, long time ago, my dad was, I'm really blessed. I want to share that with y'all, because I actually am in my dad's old job. And when I first started, I was in my dad's old office. So he was, they did a project up at Glacier National Park years ago, looking at the glacier, the receding glaciers, and it's called Glacier National Park Ice Patch Project. You guys you could Google that, check that out. But we're looking at what are the exposures that we're seeing under those ice patches that are melting and receding. They actually found a bison carcass or a bison skeleton underneath one of those. So I know I'm going to run out of time. So the elders that we visited with, Stephen Small Salmon, he's actually, if you look at our climate strategy, which is online, it's at csktclimate.org. Stephen is one of the original elders that I interviewed during that process of developing that strategy. And he's the only one left out of 8 at the time. So I did that in 2012. So just in the last 10 years, I've lost almost every one of those elders, including my dad. So Stephen talks about the stories that he heard from his elders, his dad, and Pete Beaverhead. Pete was not his dad, but they lived really close. Mitch Small Salmon and Stephen, they lived right up here, and my grandparents lived about a mile down the road. And he talked about, there's too many people going up there now, and we know that, right? Now you have to have a permit, and you have to sign up a couple days before. You can't even go in there until you get a permit to go in. We can actually access the park. I can go up pretty much anytime, any day, and go into the park. One of the things that they were concerned about was the ability to gather foods and berries in the park. And we can do that, but they limit us to something like a quart or something like that. And the elders are like, no way. We should be able to pick as many berries as we need. Johnny Arlee is another one of our elders that he talked about. The climate change is happening, affecting different aspects of our environment. Park archaeologists mentioned that the rivers are changing, they're eroding. So those are some of the things we looked at. The archaeological sites are changing and being impacted by climate change. Francis Ald is one of our Kootenai elders. And I think there's quite a bit of information about how we are connected to the area. Glacier National Park has been important for all of us over the years. And this project, I believe, like I said earlier, has helped strengthen that relationship with the park people, with the people that work there, the personnel, and within the tribal organization. I'm working on another project right now with Glacier National Park around the RAD concept, and RAD is resist, accept, direct. So we want to make sure that the park is notifying us prior to any type of work that's going to happen. I use an example of St. Mary's Bridge. What usually happens is they'll come up with a plan, they'll come up with alternatives, and then they'll send it to me, and it's like, hey, what do you think about this, Mike? And I'm like, well, that area is a historic campsite, and there's a lithic scatter all over that, around that bridge area. So basically that's where the resist comes in, because it's like, maybe you should have called me 6 months ago or a year ago when you was first thinking about replacing that bridge, and we wouldn't have to go back to the beginning. So I'm extremely grateful for my elders, for our tribal council who supported this, North Carolina State University, the graduate students, Courtney Hotchkiss, Eleanor Knight, and Jay Lee Van DeVelde, and Aaron. We keep in touch. SKC students that I had as interns that helped me do interviews with the elders, Jay Bird, Awani Williams, Camille Whiteman, and Riley R. Lee, and National Park Partners, Amanda Babson, David Goldstein, Karen Mutter, and John Turk. And that is it. Thank you so much.
Michael, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in the Q&A is at the end. Our next speaker today is Dr. Partick Gonzalez. Patrick has a professional background, deep background in climate change assessment. He was at one point, prior to the Trump administration, the chief climate scientist for the National Park Service. More recently, he served a tour of duty in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Biden administration, and currently runs the Institute for Parks, People, and Biodiversity at the University of California, Berkeley. Berkeley has a long history of producing eminent scientists who have a great knowledge and passion for the national parks. And Patrick is one of those. So Patrick, please join us.
Thank you very much, Destry, and thanks to everybody for your interest. On a winter morning, 36 years ago, I awoke on the floor of Yosemite Valley, and stepping out of my tent was like stepping into an Ansel Adams photograph. The brilliant white of the snow, the silver of the granite walls, and the dark black of the ponderosa pine canopy. Since then, however, published scientific research, using in part data from Yosemite, has shown that human-caused climate change has altered so many aspects of that scene. Hotter temperatures have increased wildfire, melted snowpack, and shifted plant and animal species upslope. Scientific research has found other impacts of human-caused climate change in other World Heritage sites, but the US and the world are now making progress on carbon solutions, offering hope for the future. So today I'll briefly review the science of human-caused climate change in US World Heritage sites from published scientific research by me and others. And all the examples I'm going to show you are from UNESCO World Heritage sites in the US. The human cause of climate change is important because it points us to the solution. Cars, power plants, and other human sources pump 11 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere every year, while forests, oceans, and soils naturally remove 6 billion tons. So the remainder, 5 billion tons, goes up into the atmosphere, and it's that fundamental imbalance that causes climate change. This has increased carbon dioxide to its highest level in 2 million years, far above the natural range of variation. And that has increased global temperature to its highest level in 120,000 years, again, higher than natural variation. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that's the international panel that produces the authoritative assessments of climate change, for which it was awarded a share of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. And I've served as a lead author on 4 reports of the IPCC. IPCC has analyzed all the potential causal factors there on the right, and shown that the measured heating from weather station measurements there on the left equals the net effect of human activities. So human activities have caused climate change. All credible scientists agree on that. The increased heat from climate change is equivalent to one of those old 100-watt light bulbs burning continuously over every square meter of the earth at the height of a medium person. That bulb burning day and night, 365 days a year, continuously. That's a lot of heat. And of course, the main observed impact of that is an increase in temperature. And this map shows the rate of increase across the 50 United States and a few of the overseas territories. The darkest reds here are 2.5 degrees Celsius per century, so it's about 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And we actually see our colleagues and I conducted this analysis, and it was the first analysis at 800 meters spatial resolution on the ground, and the first analysis of all 424 US national parks. And we found that climate change exposes the US national parks to double the amount of heating of the United States as a whole. And that's because national parks are located in extreme environments, in the high Arctic, at high elevations, and in the desert Southwest. The 24 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the United States are often found in these areas of high exposure to climate change. From Hawaii volcanoes to Wrangell St. Elias, the rate of heating has been significant and at or above the global average. This map shows the change in annual total precipitation, with the darkest blues increase of 50% in a century, darkest browns a decrease. And climate change is tending to increase precipitation around the world because warmer air holds more moisture. And also, as I pointed out earlier, climate change is an input of energy into the atmospheric system, and that expresses itself through more convection with more storms, and so more rainfall. Yet it's redistributing that energy in idiosyncratic ways, and some areas are experiencing extreme drought, and that includes the southwestern United States and the eastern part of Alaska. Now I'm going to show you a series of examples from published scientific research of impacts of climate change. All of these have gone through these two scientific procedures of detection and attribution, that the changes are statistically significantly different from natural variability, and analyses have specifically looked at, analyzed the different potential causal factors and found that human-caused climate change has driven these changes, and not other factors such as urbanization or agricultural expansion or air and water pollution. Those are all threats, as we know, to World Heritage Sites. And to focus in on climate change requires this type of analysis. So this is Muir Glacier in Glacier Bay National Park. And keep your eye here on the top of the glacier against that mountain, 1941. 63 years later, Muir Glacier has melted substantially. So this is before, and this is after. 63 years, 640 meters of ice have melted at the lowest extent. That's equivalent to the height of one World Trade Center, and climate change has melted 16% of global glacier ice in the past century. Climate change has caused a drought in the southwestern US. It's most severe since the 1500s, including in Chaco culture and across the southwestern US. In Yosemite National Park and across the western US, climate change has doubled the area burned by wildfire above natural levels. Wildfire is natural and necessary for most woodlands and forests across Western North America, but of course, excessive wildfire damages ecosystems and kills people, and climate change has doubled the area over natural. So also in Yosemite and across the western United States, climate change has doubled tree death from drought, which we've seen, wildfire, which we've seen, and also bark beetle infestations, which you see here in Yosemite. And again, emblematic of what's going on across the western United States, in Yosemite, climate change has caused a biome shift of subalpine forest upslope into formerly treeless meadows. In New York City and along all of our coast, climate change has raised sea level. At New York City, close to the Statue of Liberty National Monument, climate change has raised sea level about up to your knee since 1856. And in Papaʻanamokuakea Marine National Monument and across global oceans, climate change has increased sea surface temperatures almost 1 degree Celsius in the past century. Climate change, 90% of the extra energy goes into the oceans first, and this is heating ocean waters. In Papaʻanamokuakea also, and across the Pacific Ocean, across global oceans, climate change is increasing acidity. And the pH number seems kind of small, 0.15, but it's a logarithmic scale. So translated, it's a 40% increase of acidity since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This acidification has dissolved or corroded the shells of marine life and dissolved corals around the world in tropical coral reefs. So those were all impacts detected, attributed to human-caused climate change in World Heritage Sites of the US. Now, this is what could happen with continued climate change. And to properly analyze that, the IPCC has defined emission scenarios of the future. Emission scenarios are storylines of the future that are functions of population, energy use, and economic activity. And this graph shows on the bottom time, and on the left side here, the heating compared to the pre-industrial era. And the black line is what we've already measured with weather station measurements around the world. And these colored lines are potential futures, because projecting climate change is not like predicting the weather. Weather prediction is statistical and probabilistic. It's based on past data. But future climate change depends on our behavior, again, on population, energy, and economic activities. So these are the range of potential futures. And right now, the world is in between the orange and the red here, which is a slight improvement over the past 2 decades. We used to be on the worst case scenario here, but now because of global action, we're trending in a better direction. But yet some of the risks of continued climate change are increases in drought in the south, here in Mesa Verde National Park and across the southwestern US. Climate change could increase the probability of a drought that occurs now once in 100 years. In the future, it could occur every year. So 100 in 100 years. And we know, of course, what happens to cultures that experience extreme droughts over extended periods of time from our World Heritage Sites. Wildfire, again, is natural and necessary, but climate change is increasing the frequency of wildfire. And here in the Taos Pueblo and across the lower 48 states, climate change could increase the burned area an astounding 1,400% under the worst case, including in Yellowstone National Park, where an increase of 4 degrees Celsius could quadruple at least burned area. Sea level rise, again, threatens coastal areas, including Everglades National Park, where half of the land area could be inundated. That's permanently underwater. Those are the areas that are blue here in the map. And the Colorado River, essential for the riparian ecosystems in the heart of the Grand Canyon. Climate change could reduce Colorado River flow up to half by mid-century. In Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve and other World Heritage sites with glaciers and ice cover, climate change increases the risk of exposing precious artifacts that degrade very quickly when exposed to the ambient atmosphere. And of course, climate change also threatens the built environment, including our notable heritage sites like Falling Water. And the combination of increased temperature and increased humidity in the eastern United States here increases weathering rates and deterioration, of course, of materials that have been out in the environment for a long time. Okay, so that was a lot of bad news. We're going to aim at solutions now, and a little good news if each one of us takes meaningful action on climate change. So every little bit of carbon pollution increases global temperatures a little bit. And so, keeping the temperature of the Earth, or the temperature increase, below or between 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius sets a budget, a carbon budget for us. And so here we are. The black line is where we are right now in the progression of the cumulative carbon emissions ever since the Industrial Revolution. And so all we have left is between this black line and this first green line. And at current rates, that could be, we could hit that in the 2030s. And so the IPCC, analyzing all of the data that I showed you in the previous sections, we've determined that that 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees, that's the goal for avoiding dangerous impacts to people and nature. And limiting the temperature to 1.5 degrees requires us to cut carbon emissions in half by 2030 and to near zero by 2050. So that's in half by 2030 and to zero by 2050. That means no fossil fuel powered cars, no coal burning, no oil extraction. In fact, leaving fossil fuels in the ground. This is a very major challenge, obviously. Natural ecosystems provide one solution, one part of the solution. And North America, the U.S. national parks actually conserve ecosystems with the highest amount of carbon per square on the ground, the coast redwoods, and up to 2,600 tons per hectare. But natural carbon solutions are only 10% of the emissions, or natural ecosystems are only 10% of the emissions. 90% come from fossil fuels, and particularly fossil fuel burning in the United States. So if all of the cars and light trucks in the United States were their own separate country, they would be the #8 carbon polluter in the world, more than all of the emissions from all sectors in France and Canada combined. So this is a major emitter that we need to control and eliminate. So you can take meaningful action on climate change by walking, biking, taking public transit. You can cut your personal transportation carbon pollution up to 99%. I live a car-free life, and I encourage all of you to also. A lot of the sustainability actions are now bearing fruit. We are showing progress in the United States. Renewable energy exceeded coal in 2019, and it continues to go up. That's the green line. And the coal is the brown line, which goes down. Renewables have exceeded coal for the first time since the 1800s. And so the United States, we've cut our greenhouse gas emissions 13%. A lot of this is renewable energy, like this solar array in a World Heritage Site in Yosemite National Park. So there's some good news that a lot of these sustainable actions are now, we're now making progress. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in the latest report, we assessed all of the options and concluded that limiting the temperature increase to this 1.5 to 2 degrees is attainable with concerted global action at all levels, governments, companies, individuals, using existing technologies and behaviors that we have right now. So you, me, all of us together, through meaningful personal actions, collective action that builds up together, we can halt climate change and save and protect nature, people, and our world heritage. Thank you.
Wow, Patrick, that was wonderful. I'm gonna when we put this up on YouTube, I'm gonna have to watch it a couple more times to to get all those graphs in my head. But you did it well, and it's really a huge amount of work that you've done, and it represents our challenge ahead in a very vivid way. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, final speaker among our group before we go to Q&A is Felix Lopez. Felix is the Chief of Cultural Resource Management for San Juan National Historical Park World Heritage Site in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He's been in that job since 1999. The fortresses that are protected in this park were begun by the Spanish in the 1500s. They represent the oldest man-made fortification in the Americas. And sea level rise is happening at this place. So Felix, please come and tell us what you found and what you're doing about it. Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to address you all. And let me share my screen. All right. So let me start by talking a little bit about the site. The more important dates that you see here, basically the establishment of the site in 1949, the transference of the National Historic Site to the National Park Service in 1961, and in 83, where we were inscribed in the World Heritage List as the La Fortaleza. It does include the Governor's Mansion and the park, basically on the World Heritage List under criteria 6. There are many other landmarks associated with the site. One that I'm going to be talking a little bit about is Paseo del Morro National Recreational Trail in 95, because that's one of the areas that's more affected, if you will, by the possibility of sea level rise at the historic site. This is us in the context of the world. Our island is right on Hurricane Lane. Our islands, I should say. This is the San Juan Islet in and Old San Juan. The forts basically surround the city. The fortification system includes two huge fortifications, Castillo de San Cristobal and Castillo San Felipe del Morro. 3/4 of the city wall that remains. Basically, the city wall is mostly intact. And then a smaller fort across the harbor from Fort San Felipe del Morro, Fort San Juan de la Cruz. Everybody knows it in Puerto Rico as El Cañuelo because it sits on the exit of the Bayamon River near in the San Juan Bay. So this is a map that we had developed for a project that we did in 2014 called the Climate Friendly Parks. The sea level rise and coastal erosion is one of the most immediate threats to the sites right now. This is the Esplanade of El Morro, how it should look. This is basically some of the effects that erosion, both by pedestrian traffic, but also because of continuous rain in the area. Normally, this beautiful area, which is basically one of the few recreational spaces that the city of Old San Juan has, gets heavy rain in particular months, so it looks like this. And then afterwards, it starts looking like this. This is a quick picture of the erosion happening near the coastline of Isla de Cabras. This is an island where the other smaller fortification of El Cañuelo sits. That erosion basically is affecting the whole area surrounding the Isla de Cabras, but also surrounding the fort of about 3 sides of the fort is surrounded by water. And the other threat that we are experiencing is basically more frequent and more powerful storms. This is a photograph of the lighthouse that sits on top of Castillo San Felipe del Morro. It's an original lighthouse built by the Spanish. This is a photo of the lighthouse after Hurricane Maria. As you can see, obviously from the picture, there are cracks that are happening on the lighthouse throughout all the structure. Obviously, the painting is going off. Structurally, it's showing signs of deterioration of the mortar and the brick and the joints. And then interior cracking of the walls and corrosion that is affecting the whole structural integrity of the structure. We are preparing, as I said, in 2014, we did a workshop called Climate Friendly Parks, where we were talking about our impacts, operational impacts, if you will, of the operation of San Juan National Historic Site in climate change. We started implementing measurements to minimize those impacts. But one of the more important things that this particular effort did was the introduction of the concept of vulnerability assessment, and also for the need for adapting the site. We also did a coastal hazards and sea level rise asset vulnerability assessment. This was mostly highlighting the potential vulnerabilities related to sea level rise, coastal flooding, storm surge, erosion and shoreline change, and historical and past flood information. We were using those variables to determine how vulnerable the assets, specifically buildings and roads, were if they were to be affected by climate change factors. We found 6 out of 35 buildings with high vulnerability, 3 with moderate, and 2 trails that were considered vulnerable. Of importance here is that of the 3 buildings that are high vulnerability, there are portions of the historic site like Castillo San Felipe del Morro and Castillo San Cristobal that are touching the water. And these areas, literally with 1 foot of increase of sea level, which is basically what's forecasted, it might represent basically that some of these things might be underwater in the next 50 years if we don't do anything. We are also adding an element to this. Most of the things that you've seen that the agency, the National Park Service, has been doing, it's mostly an assessment of what we, the NPS, thinks are problems that we might face. We are adding another element to this, which is the impacts that our communities, our surrounding communities may think can affect the historic site and the resources that we manage and in the values of the World Heritage Site. We are partnering with the Human Ecology Laboratory of the Scripps Institution at USC San Diego to help us on this particular effort. Actually, this week, on Saturday and Sunday, we will be having our first public workshop, basically meeting with some stakeholders and community leaders to work out basically the logistics of the assessment. We want basically to incorporate these considerations into any management alternatives that we might develop to address the impacts of climate change, which are often overlooked or sometimes not taken into considerations when we are dealing with issues of climate change. And another project that there are many projects that the park has to address certain impacts of climate change. One of them, it's an $8 million project that we are working with the Corps of Engineers to complete the control measures, if you will, to stop erosion on the hillside of El Morro. But this one over here is one that I think has a better, that incorporates the analysis of the effects of climate change into its design and hopefully into its execution. In 2017, as I said, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico with devastating impacts. One of the most affected areas of the park was this area, the Isla de Cabras Island and Fort San Juan de la Cruz. This fort originally occupied the whole extension of a small island in which it basically was constructed. And then in the 1930s, the United States Army constructed the road that we see on the left side of the photograph, and then all the other island that you see north to the fort. So it's a man-made island with the exception of where the fort sits. So it was surrounded by water naturally. So erosion it's not an unknown issue for us in this particular area. But what happened after Maria was of such a proportion that we basically saw the need to intervene drastically in this area to ensure that the fort would be secure and we wouldn't have a collapsing structure basically on the park. So in the planning for this particular project, we incorporated elements of resilience using relevant data regarding possible increase of sea level rise in the in the area. We studied wave action and storm surge, and we model it to see what could in the next 50 years constitute an impact to the area. And then we designed this concept basically that incorporates further protections to the fortification and to the Isla de Cabras in itself to ensure that hopefully if the trend continues of sea level rise, the design here meets the conditions to preserve the fortification and minimize the impacts of erosion in Isla de Cabras. What's curious about this particular project is that one of the things we tried to solve was the issue of the road in itself leading to Isla de Cabras, being that we needed the road to access the fort. It's not under the Park Service jurisdiction, so we did a community meeting with the mayor of the town, and it was fascinating to see how the community knows better. They obviously told us stories of when they were kids and they could basically walk from one side of the area of Palo Seco to the fort because the water was so shallow. The construction of the road stopped the natural flows of the sands on the area, and then that's what's creating most of the erosion problems, not related to obviously the impact of the storm in 2017. So they know a better solution than the one probably we have. It's just a matter of see how we can incorporate it also into this project within the solutions, obviously, that the Park Service has. I want to leave with some thoughts about this. One of them is, again, these vulnerability assessments and what is it that we're trying to accomplish with them other than preserve the resources? In other words, are these parks, are these sites, are these resources just things that we manage, or the deeper meaning of the historic site and also World Heritage site is being addressed in relation to what the community and the stakeholders think it's also good for them, for the sites. We need to ensure that there's more financial support, if you will, for researching the effects of climate change on cultural resources specifically. Most of the climate change science that we get a hold of is usually directed specifically to the preservation of natural resources, which is obviously important. But not much of that research is actually devoted to the impacts that climate change is having on cultural resources, other than when it relates, say, to sea level rise and or erosion. Also, what are we sacrificing? What is it that we are going to actually preserve? Are we going to make hard decisions about what is it that we can actually protect and keep, knowing that the impacts of climate change are here and probably they will be here for the next 100 years if we don't do a drastic change in the way we live our lives. And lastly, who are we talking to? Who are we involved in and preparing to do an analysis and or tell us what the impacts of climate change is on their lives? Who are we talking to? Who are we preparing, and who's the next generation that's going to keep this issue alive so we can basically find or implement, not find, but implement long-lasting and sustainable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. That was thorough and very well presented. So if Patrick and Michael would come back on, turn your screens on. We have a few minutes for a little discussion or some questions. I think, as both Michael and Felix indicated, engaging the local community, knowledge of traditional cultures and knowledge of relevant people that have decades of experience with places is an important facet in addressing and hopefully resolving climate change. But it seems to me that all of the research and all of the management that's gone on with World Heritage Sites and other places still hasn't penetrated the public, the general public, sufficiently to compel politicians to take this as one of, if not the highest priority for solutions. So I'm wondering if any of you or each of you have some thoughts about how we do this. I know Felix mentioned, educating the next generation, and that's of course critical, so that they, as they become the leaders and the managers and the scientists of the future, they have this at the front of their thinking. But maybe that's not soon enough. Maybe we have to do it with people that are in charge at the moment. So what do you think, gentlemen?
Destry, first of all, on public perception, long-term longitudinal polls by Yale and Stanford show consistently that 2/3 of Americans recognize the science of climate change and want serious climate change action. So the part of the public you're talking about is generally, just plainly speaking, conservative, people who are conservative. And then second, on the political will, actually, President Obama and President Biden have established and implemented the most progressive and massive investments in sustainable energy and other climate change action. The Obama administration first started by regulating carbon dioxide under the Clean Air Act. And of course, the Biden-Harris administration implemented the biggest investment in climate change with the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So just speaking plainly, there's a very persistent end of the political spectrum that has resisted both the science and the action. But we see, as I showed you, the increase in renewable energy, the decrease in US emissions shows that a great part of the American public is taking action. And so we need to expand that. And that's what you're talking about, is kind of a recalcitrant faction, plus individual action of people who are sensitive. We can't live our lives like past generations. That's what created the problem. And so I've outlined a couple of recommendations for that, and using World Heritage Sites as an incentive for people to take action on climate change is one effective means.
That's great. I know we had a lengthy conversation with Park Service Director Chuck Sams a year and a half ago about this very thing, and suggested that the World Heritage Sites, which are also the icons of the national park system in the US, should be the poster children, so to speak, for addressing and remediating the effects of climate change. They haven't done that yet, but a lot of the parks are getting attention, and recognition of the parks does resonate with the public. So it's certainly a place where focus belongs. Michael, engaging tribes across the country in understanding their knowledge and applying it to management of World Heritage Sites and national parks more broadly is something that Secretary Holland and Director Sams have been speaking to frequently and regularly. do you have any thoughts on how that emphasis that they're making generally to traditional ecological knowledge can be specifically useful in getting the public to understand that we need to do something immediately about climate change effects?
Sure, Destry, thanks. First of all, I'd like to say that I think the younger generation is becoming very much engaged. I have been asked to testify as an expert witness in a case called Held v. Montana, where a group of young people are suing the state of Montana because the Constitution guarantees the right to clean air and clean water.
Huh.
And that's not happening. So that case will be a landslide case because it's the first one that's going to go to court. That's going to happen next in June.
Wow.
So that we'll see what happens there, right? But I think the kids, you know, we just had our Earth Day event here at the tribe. I organized that last week, Friday, and I had all of the under 40s on one side of the gym at Salish Kootenai College and all of the over 40s on the other. And we met in the middle, and I said, you know, the over 40s need to make a pledge and a commitment to the under 40s, the younger ones, that we are going to change our lifestyle. And it takes, I mean, it sadly enough, it almost takes something where we're directly impacted before we change our lifestyle, whether it's diabetes or whatever. I mean, we're so stuck in this, you know, everyday life that sometimes we don't want to change, or it's too hard or whatever. But you know, I made a commitment to myself a while back. You guys remember when COVID hit, everything shut down, and I always said Mother Earth smiled at that time when the whole world shut down, and there was no, I was sitting outside by my house and there's no chemtrails, there's no jets going across the sky, and you've seen all the social media stuff where, you know, salmon are coming up these rivers where they haven't been for 100 years and stuff like that. And now here we are. Felix is in San Juan, you know, Patrick's in California, and you're in on the East Coast, and I'm in God's country here in Montana, and we're meeting. Zoom, I just feel like every day it's like we need to learn a lesson from this pandemic, which is a good in a way, which has done Mother Earth good. But we really need to learn a lesson. It's always nice to get together in person, but you know, I tell people that's the first time I got to meet your dog or your cat or your children, you know, in the background, whatever. I'm actually going to be going to Destry. Maybe you could buy me lunch. I'm going to be going over to Shepherdtown, West Virginia, in June.
Okay.
With a group to develop and implementation guidelines for the Department of Interior, responsibilities for considering an inclusion of indigenous knowledge in departmental actions and scientific research.
Cool. Well,
how do we make a change? How do we get them? We make fry bread and stew, and we have a public gathering.
well, if you come to San Juan, maybe you get some of those cabras off of that island and have some goat stew. I've had that before, and it's not bad. So, Felix, any thoughts here as it relates to engaging your community?
So, first of all, thank you again. Yeah, so there are many ways in which the Park Service, I think, it's doing certain things, you know, through educational programs targeting issues that at least directly at the park impacts their enjoyment, if you will, of their experience. such as, recycle, clean up, the use of less plastic, et cetera, to try to change that behavior. At the same time, but parallel to that, there is a lack of, if you will, infrastructure to go green. And that is also something that sometimes it's in conflict with the message that you're trying to give the public in general. And by that, I mean, like, for example, you want them to recycle, you want the public to help you recycle and, reduce waste and all these kinds of things. There are no recycling centers in the island right now. They closed, all of them have closed after Hurricane Maria. None of them have reopened. You wanna try to ask visitors to stop the use of, say, plastic water bottles. You cannot say that, but you can obviously encourage them to do so. However, anywhere that you go on island, what they sell you when you ask them for water is a plastic bottle. They give you water in a plastic bottle instead of giving you, So it's those kinds of little things that you have to be mindful when you are trying to give away the message, but at the same time that you still have to encourage people to start changing in their behaviors. We do so. Now, there are also certain recognition issues, if you will, of, as I said, the problems that we have related to cultural resources. When you are talking about climate change, people immediately think about, again, sea level rise and the melting of glaciers and the storms and all of that. They don't relate necessarily to the issues that we confront, such as the possible loss of a very important resource. And when you try to correlate those issues, it's very difficult because they don't necessarily match in people's minds. So those are, I guess you asked me for solutions. I guess I'm putting out there that there are more challenges right now in how to deliver the message than in people necessarily understanding it.
Right. Gentlemen, any closing thoughts, final comments before we end today's seminar? This will go up on our YouTube channel within a few days, and I'm sure we'll get many hundreds or thousands more views of this. It's been excellent, and we really appreciate your involvement.
I was just going to put it in the chat, but people can look at our website at csktclimate.org. And you have my contact information. So Felix, I'll be coming down, visiting you, and maybe Patrick. And
Good.
Send me an email. We can I'll get you around.
I started real quick. I started a project here, program called EAGLES, Environmental Advocates for Global and Local Ecological Sustainability. And it's a youth project that we're getting all the kids in the schools on a reservation involved in recycling and community gardening and stuff like that. So there's information about that too. I'd like to.
Is that on your website?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll look for it.
Yep. Thanks.
Terrific. All right. We appreciate the audience today, and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And I appreciate, gentlemen, all three of you, Felix, Patrick, Michael, for your vigorous and intelligent engagement on this issue. It's extremely helpful. Every bit of engagement moving this difficult problem forward is going to help. So we look forward to working with all of you going forward in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So long, everybody.